Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, everyone. My name is Grove Harris, and I am the Director of Global Advocacy for the Temple of Understanding, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this Eco-Justice for All dialogue. Our topic today, plastics pollution, intergovernmental, faith-based, and activist efforts. We have a wonderful panel of speakers to discuss their different angles on the work that's being done on this so important topic. Just to set the stage, I'll just remind us that beyond the devastating pollution caused by plastic waste, beyond the fossil fuels involved, the air pollution and the intense damage to our oceans, there is profound damage to animals, including fish, turtles, birds, and us humans. More concerns about health are coming forward on top of decades of documented damage to human health. There are medical doctors who are signing on to the intense concern for this issue. There's certainly the moral issues and the social justice issues about who is most impacted by this. And we are just really grateful to have everyone here today as we discuss this. First, I would like to start by acknowledging that the Temple of Understanding's office at the Church Center at the United Nations is on the traditional territory of the Lenape people, who were violently displaced over 400 years and who remain closely connected with this land, both in diaspora coming into the city and New York City being a home to a really diverse Native American population. I'd like to invite people to just take a moment and think about the traditional caregivers of the lands on which they are currently residing. Thank you. It's the general practice of the Temple of Understanding to center Indigenous wisdoms, and I appreciate your taking a moment of remembrance there. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. I am so pleased that Juan Pablo Celis Garcia has been able to come with us today, and he is an Observers Engagement Liaison Specialist, and under the particular rubric of this treaty negotiation, he needs to be quite rigorous in how he conducts his role. But without further ado, Juan, I'm going to put it over to you to explain to us what you do and how civil society can engage as fully as possible with this incredibly important treaty process that's now going into overtime. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Grove. And it is really great to be with you all in this webinar. And I'm very pleased to also see a lot of familiar names in the attendees list. So fantastic to be here with you today. So allow me to just share my screen for a moment. As Grove mentioned, I am Juan Pablo, the focal point for the observers in the INC process, which is the process that is discussing a legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. So I just want to give you first a little bit of an overview of an understanding of what the INC process is. So initially, the INC process was mandated by the UN Environment Assembly Resolution 514, which was titled End Plastic Pollution. And it gave a mandate to UNEP to create a secretariat that would coordinate the negotiations of for a legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. And it started about a little bit more than 2 years ago. And so far we've had 5 sessions of the INC where member states have gathered and also the observers organizations have gathered and have been part of a discussion on the drafting of a legally binding instrument that will address the full life cycle of plastics. So some of the topics that and the issues that were addressed in this resolution that gave the mandate of the INC included taking into account previous declarations like the Rio Declaration, and also a mandate that will give the INC positioned to discuss the full life cycle of plastics from source to sea, and also to discuss voluntary approaches or binding as well approaches to address the issue of plastic pollution. Because as you know, plastic pollution has become a global problem and a problem that has to be addressed now. So just to share with you a little bit of a schedule of how the INC sessions have been going on. So as I've mentioned, we had about 2 years that the sessions have been taking place. We had the INC1 in Uruguay, we had INC2 in France, then INC3 in Kenya, INC4 in Canada, which happened last year, and then the latest one, which happened just about 2 months ago in the Republic of Korea. So there was in the resolution of UNEA 514, it was mentioned that the ambition was to complete the negotiations by the end of 2024. However, the fifth session that took place in Korea, it did the committee of members in the INC decided to resume the session this year to have a continue the discussion in this in a resumed session of the fifth session this year towards the middle of 2025. So so we are heading there. Right now we are in the preparations for that resumed session of INC, or we would call it INC 5.2. And yet we're still yet to confirm the venue and the dates for that session. And then the idea, as in any intergovernmental process, and after there is an agreement on the text, there will be a diplomatic conference. So you might be familiar with this if you go through the climate process, the climate change, or the the Minamata, if you have heard about the Mercury process, or any other convention making, like for instance, the High Seas Treaty. There is always a negotiating committee that prepares a draft text that would eventually become the final text that will go to the diplomatic conference. And in the diplomatic conference, it will be open for signatories, where member states will start ratifying the instrument that will be the beginning of an instrument or convention or treaty on whichever name the member state will be given to. So it's an ongoing process, and the ambition is that we complete these negotiations in the resumed session, which will take place this year. And then, as you see on the schedule, we would have the 7th session of the UN Environment Assembly that is taking place in December, end of this year. So this is how the calendar is looking now as of now. But let's just dig a little bit into what is the current status of the text is looking like. So after INC 5.1 in Busan, we had the chair's non-paper, which was accepted as a starting point to facilitate negotiations for the next resumed session. So the text has different aspects on how to address plastic pollution. So you could also go to the INC5 webpage, and under documents, you can see the current drafts and text that has been negotiated, where you can find all the different details on how plastic pollution has been addressed in these negotiations. So the document which gives really a clear structure on different articles needed for the future treaty instrument. And we could see that there is also some convergence on many issues, but there is also some key divergences that remain to be discussed with member states. So when we talk about products, including chemicals of concern, when we talk about sustainable production and consumption of plastics, and when we talk about the establishment of a financial mechanism that will help catalyze in finance and alignment of financial flows that would support the future of the treaty. So these topics you can find a bit more detail once you go into the text that is being discussed. So now let's just go to the specific participation of civil society, UN entities, and stakeholders. In the INC process, all these categories are called observers because as this is a member state process, everyone else who is not a member state is considered an observer to the process. So there are some rules that have been established, also UN rules and draft rules of procedure that have been provisionally applied to this process, and they give a structure on who are observers, who can be an observer to this process, and how can they participate. We have developed an engagement guide that you could also find in the INC webpage, right on the left side, on the right side, where it gives you a little bit more instructions of what an observer is. But I just want to share a little bit of a structure here so you have an idea. If some of you are not engaged in the INC process yet, maybe let's see if you can find yourself in this table. So there are three types of observers categories. The main three. One is the UN entities, so every UN entity can participate as an observer. But then we also have the intergovernmental organizations, those who are accredited to the UN Environment Assembly, to the General Assembly, etc. And then we have the accredited non-governmental organizations. So those are the three main categories. But then within the NGOs, we have three other categories. So NGOs that have consultative status with ECOSOC, with the Economic and Social Council, are eligible to participate in our process as observers, as accredited observers. We also have the UNEP accredited NGOs, which are participating in the UN Environment Assembly. Those are also eligible to participate as observers. And then we have all the other NGOs that participate in other multilateral environmental agreements. So if you are an NGO participating in the Convention on Biological Diversity, you are eligible to participate in our process. And many other conventions that are listed in the engagement guide that you can find in the INC webpage. So this is the main structure and how you can formally participate as an observer. So just I would give you as a last slide, I will just give you a few details of what does it really mean if I am an observer into the process. What can I do? So the INC has given in every session, before every session, we give travel support to 20 observer organizations. And these also considering geographical representation, gender parity, and so on. You are eligible to participate and registered and applied for travel support. There are 20 slots that are given before every session. So it's actually a really timely opportunity to talk about this, because we don't see in this process, even though we have thousands of registrants coming to our meetings. Last time we had over 2,000 registration of observers, and then we have over 1,200 who actually came to the meeting, individuals. But as the focal point for observers, I have noticed that the faith-based organizations, there are not really that many who participate in these meetings, and I think it's an opportunity that we have to really bring in other voices from the faith-based groups to bring their perspective into these negotiations. So I feel that it's an opportunity to encourage other organizations who are eligible to come in as observers to bring their perspectives into the process. So it would be great to see faith-based organizations applying also for travel support, because I know there is that limitation as well. Then we have some requirements for registration, the usual for some, standard for UN meetings, nomination letter, passport image, etc. We have a dedicated registration email if you have questions about that. As I've mentioned, we have the travel support. And then we also have, in the lead up to every session, a series of webinars where we have discussions, where we give an open space for observers to talk about the issues, to give their reflections and ideas on the next session that will be coming in. So we would hopefully be having the same this time, which will be open to all the observers as well to participate. And then just to give you a little bit, just to finalize my intervention, there are some differences when we talk about conventions, instruments, and when we also talk about pacts or declarations. The UN system, for instance, had the Agenda 2030, the Our Common Agenda, the Pact of the Future. These have been, very important declarations and statements that have been made by member states. However, there is a difference when we talk about treaties, conventions, instruments that are legally binding. And this is, I bring this point to you just to give you a little bit of that, why is it so important to engage in these negotiations? It's because this, whichever will be coming out of this, will become eventually an instrument or a treaty that will affect the lives from the national to the local. And it will, the legislations of those governments who will be ratifying this instrument have to, be following what it is included in this instrument to ensure that it goes down to the local levels. So it does really affect everybody, and it's an important step for everyone to be engaged. And lastly, faith-based organizations, like many others, stakeholders, have a great potential to lift up the importance of plastic pollution, the importance of having negotiations and such. So I really welcome you to encourage other faith-based organizations to engage and participate. This process has to listen to all kinds of voices, and that includes the faith-based organizations. And of course, organizations have the liberty to host conversations, consultations, bilateral meetings with member states on the sidelines. And this is happening with a lot of the organizations that are participating in our process. They're hosting consultations, they're hosting events, dialogues on the sidelines of the INC, which of course are not official part of the INC process, but they are still so important and so relevant to highlight the topics that matter the most to these different groups of stakeholders. And this is, of course, fostering an environment of cooperation and collaboration. So with that, I just want to finish my intervention, but I'm very looking forward to connecting with you further. Back to you, Grove.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Juan, for giving us that great overview and for being available for future questions and concerns about that. And wonderful to get that wide open invitation, even to apply for travel funding. That's fantastic. I wanted to, before I introduce our next speaker, I want to also thank that our partners in this is actually a co-organized webinar with our colleagues at the UN Faith for Earth Coalition. And our next speaker will be Azmaira Alibhai, who is the Faith and Ecosystems Coordinator of UNEP's Faith for Earth. And she will give us an overview of the different streams of faith organizing that has been done and that is leading into this process. Azmaira, the floor is yours now, please.
Thank you very much, Grove, and thank you to Juan. Good evening, everybody from UNEP's headquarters here in Nairobi, Kenya. It's my pleasure to co-host this webinar with the Temple of Understanding on plastic pollution, intergovernmental, faith-based, and activist efforts. I do have to apologize because I have been caught in traffic and I'm on my way home, but I hope that the connection will be stable. So again, thank you for this opportunity to share with you the Faith for Earth Coalition's approach to this environmental crisis, and welcome the wisdom that faiths have to offer along with their institutional and community-based networks in efforts to beat plastic pollution. Now, the coalition facilitates with key organizations the Interfaith Working Group on Pollution. It's a convening platform that leverages the power of dialogue to advance policy. The Interfaith Working Group on Pollution, and if you have a quick look online, you'll be able to find the webpage. In fact, look for Faith and Pollution Action. This group aims to mobilize the power and influence of faith leaders and communities, particularly at the grassroots level, engage diverse faith actors exploring the extent of pollution-related issues affecting local communities and ecosystems, identify the critical challenges in implementing scalable solutions, provide a forum for the exchange of knowledge and learning at the global level, and as of now, engage in the INC process. As I said, you can read more about this in the publication Faith-Based Actions Towards a Pollution-Free Planet on the webpage Faith and Pollution Action. Now, Juan mentioned a very important point that we've not seen a lot of engagement by faith actors within the INC process, and and that's typical. If we look at UNEA, if we look at the UNFCCC COPs, the CBD COP, faith-based engagement started off with no more than 5 organizations. In fact, there were 2 accredited organizations to the UN Environment Assembly in 2019, and now we have over 85, 87 to be exact. So faith-based engagement, I think it's typical to the network that we have, aims to understand what they're getting themselves into and then engages fully in this process. And that starts with networking, with understanding who's already engaging in this space, where not formally, but at the local level or at the national level, where the opportunities lie and how they can work with one another to achieve the goals that they set. And this is the collaboration that we've seen in the biodiversity, in the climate, and hopefully now in the pollution space. The coalition aims to position faith groups as key strategic partners at UNEP and within the work on climate, on nature, and on pollution, drawing from their examples as spiritual and moral authorities to raise ambition. Now, faith actors are ensuring that communities have the support to advocate for the improvement of a shared challenge. And an example of this is the effect of dumping, unregulated dumping of waste on the health of the surrounding communities or the effect on soil quality. And Tier Fund is one organization that's accredited to the INC process and has been participating, that's been talking about the effect of rampant waste pollution and mismanagement of waste on surrounding communities. The second is to promote knowledge sharing through programs for the youth and young professionals that move ambition to action, engaging a range of age groups, talents, capabilities, and expertise. And I implore you, look within your own faith tradition and try and identify when you organize a program, or if you do organize our community organizer, um, at the range of age groups, the range of expertise, and the range of talents that present themselves in any given opportunity or activity. And we see this through the Bahu Trust, who's also a co-facilitator of the Interfaith Working Group on Pollution. Another way that faith groups are promoting knowledge exchange is ensuring that their organizations adhere to good practice, to industry standards with local partnerships. For example, transitioning to responsible waste management practices at their houses of worship, or within their faith-owned institutions or faith facilitated or managed institutions. And we see this with the Green Anglicans in the Southern Africa, who have been working on transitioning away from plastics at their events and within their institutional setups. The third, and coming back to now what all 3 of the organizations that I mentioned have put front and center in their advocacy efforts under the Interfaith Working Group, is to to have a people-centered approach. And that's to ensure that reflections of equity, of justice, leveraging their social and their political power, for example, in highlighting the plight of waste pickers as a quote unquote forgotten group, and enforcing social protections is a key part of the negotiation process of their advocacy efforts and the work that they do at the local and the national level. So Grove challenged me to present to you concrete examples of the work that's happening, and I've only given you 3 organizations that have led the way for the rest of the network in engaging in pollution at the intergovernmental level. Now, on the webpage that I shared with you, you will find the publication with many, many more examples. Have a look at the breadth of knowledge, of expertise that this network already brings. And I welcome you to join the Interfaith Working Group. It's as simple as sending me an email or emailing any of the co-facilitators that the organizations that I've mentioned, because they are very interested in expanding the leadership of this work. But these are few and powerful examples that partners within the network are pioneering at the local level. And I'll highlight the need for strong local level interventions. And you'll see this in our approach to the work, not just to the INC, but in the implementation of the treaty text. To ensuring that programs and advocacy efforts are amplified through the work of the Interfaith Working Group, but are focused on tangible actions. At the end of the day, faith groups want to see their own ambition reflected. They want to share the gaps or advantages of their own programs and voice specific concerns that their constituencies, their communities live every day, putting real faces and real stories behind this negotiation process. Working with us is simple, as I mentioned. Just reach out to us and you'll find our contact details on the webpage. And with that, Grove, over to you.
Thank you so much, Azmaira. I really appreciate your joining us even in traffic, which we can all certainly relate to. And thank you for the extended invitation for everyone to join. And also, we do know that we need community activism, local, national, regional. Beyond Plastics in the United States is actually focusing more and more on those localized actions, but they are a partner in the Break Free from Plastics movement, which Brett is a full part of and also a technical person engaged in. And Brett, I just want to say I've had such a wonderful experience cruising through your website, and I saw the different kinds of stories, the visit a toxic site. There are ways in which your website reaches out to the heart of people, offers them experience as well as just information and next steps, and the creative fundraising that I see happening. I'm so glad that you joined us today to talk about the work of the international movement that you are a part of.
Thank you so much, Grove, and thanks to all of you for being here and for having the opportunity to speak. I'm Brett Nadrich, as Grove was saying. I serve as the US and Canada Communications Officer with the Break Free from Plastic movement. Before I dive in here, I do have to give a special shout out and a thank you again to Juan for all of the amazing interventions and the opportunities to allow activists to speak up with their own interventions in plenary during the INCs. And just for clarity, Break Free from Plastic is a part of a broader coalition of civil society organizations that are pushing for the strongest possible global plastics treaty. So I'd love to dig into a little bit of what we're looking for in this treaty, and then specifically talk about how people of faith are already leading this movement, and how other faith leaders and faith institutions and religious and spiritual NGOs might get more involved in the treaty negotiations, as well as addressing the broader plastics crisis. But first, I just want to start with a quick level set as far as what this crisis is and why it's a crisis and why we have the sense of urgency for addressing it here and now through this legally binding mechanism. So before anything else, I want to note 99% of plastics are made of fossil fuels, right? That's a fact. We also know that plastics never break down in the environment. They only break up into smaller and smaller microplastic particles. And that's an important distinction because those microplastics are winding up in every part of planet Earth, from the top of Mount Everest to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. They are also winding up inside of our bodies, right? Every few days now, it seems like there is a new study that's showing microplastic pollution in our hearts, crossing the blood-brain barrier, in maternal human placenta. It's being transferred to newborns via breast milk. I mean, it's just literally every week or so we're seeing these studies show up. And it's important to note that this plastic pollution is coming at every stage of the plastics life cycle, from extraction and refining to production and consumption and ultimately disposal. And we know that the majority of the plastic that's being disposed is being disposed by landfilling or industrial incineration or some other form of burning plastic, or it's winding up as plastic waste in our oceans, in our waterways, in our city streets. And so there's two important points that stem from this, right? All of those facts together. One is that frontline and fence line communities are bearing the worst impacts of this plastics crisis, especially at the extraction and production sites, what we call upstream, as well as the downstream end for the folks who are living on the fence line of these incinerators, right? So that's one piece. The other piece is we cannot recycle our way out of this crisis, right? Part of the dialogue that's going on within these negotiations is about what the role of recycling can and should be in certain circumstances, but we know that recycling will not work sufficiently on its own to get us out of this crisis, right? What we need are non-toxic reuse systems as the way forward. And I just want to make one more point on human health before I keep sort of digging into the demands here. So there's a mounting body of evidence about how these toxic plastics are damaging human health. There is an even larger conclusive body of medical and scientific evidence over years that demonstrates beyond a reasonable doubt how the chemical additives in the plastics are already damaging human health, right? So we're talking about endocrine systems, we're talking about fertility issues, heart health, a whole range of cancers. Those are proven now. And what we're really seeing is a need to act on the scientific evidence that's already there, as well as the grounding of that scientific evidence in our indigenous and traditional knowledge systems, which have already told us that these plastics are toxic, right? And that we shouldn't be putting these chemicals in the ground. I'm reminded of something one of my colleagues, Frankie Arona from the Society of Native Nations, always says, which is these fossil fuels that were buried, they are death incarnate, right? They are dead things that fossilized and became these fossil fuels. What did you think was going to happen when you sucked death out of the ground, right? This is the spiritual teaching that Frankie gets from his elders, as he would say, from uncle, understanding we live in a fishbowl, and when you pull those things out of the ground, you're going to see human health impacts from that. That's part of the traditional knowledge systems that we want to see enshrined in this legally binding mechanism, as well as in the broader multilateral ecosystem that we all operate within. Before I forget, I just want to touch on a few more of the specific demands that the civil society coalition is pushing for in this treaty. We are demanding a cap and phase down of primary plastic polymer production, as well as banning the most hazardous chemicals in those plastics. And we want to see limiting emissions, right? Again, these are fossil fuels. 99% of these plastics are made of fossil fuels with these other toxic chemicals mixed in. We need to limit those emissions across the entire life cycle of plastics. And we also need to reduce plastic use across the entire life cycle. So what that's going to look like is a just transition for workers in the industry, as well as a whole host of other folks who are part of this movement. I will pay special credence to the waste pickers who are a part of the coalition, in particular, folks like my friend and colleague, John Chwea, who is the head of the Waste Pickers Association in Kenya, in Kisumu, the third largest city. I believe they have about 36,000 members now, right? They understand, they have come to the table and said, this plastics crisis is so bad right now, we will have enough plastic waste to pick through for our entire lifetime, right? So we're putting our trust in this process that there will be a just transition away from these plastics over a course of years that will allow the waste pickers to continue to survive at the bottom of this economic system that depends on their undervalued labor, right? But does not require them to continue picking through literally what is toxic waste, right? With no PPE, no sort of protections for them as they're doing that and as they're being compensated at unfair levels. with all of that said, I do just want to wrap up here by noting that people of faith are already a part of this movement, right? You know, I'm inspired by my own faith tradition. I'm Jewish, and a big part of why I come to this work is a tenet of our religion that's known as tikkun olam, which means repairing the earth. And it's this notion that by repairing the earth, we also repair ourselves, right? So that's my personal way of coming about this, and something I've learned doing work with the Break Free from Plastic movement for about 5 years now. I take that quite literally, right? Again, the plastics are all throughout our planet. They're also all throughout our bodies. And by addressing this crisis, we will literally repair ourselves, our bodies, our species, as we're repairing the earth, right? I also want to give a shout out to some of my other colleagues. Like, something I always say is, you can do God's work without doing God's work, you know? And some of our colleagues would identify in different ways along that spectrum. I gave a shout out before to Frankie Arona with Society of Native Nations. I'll just note, indigenous and Native leaders have been at the forefront of this movement. They are quite often at the front of the marches that we're organizing around these INCs. I'm sure many of you have seen them or been a part of those marches. But Frankie would say, like, whenever I talk about faith leaders, he's like, I don't know what a faith leader is. Like, I'm a person, you know? And in that way, he's bringing his own traditions and his own frame, right? Within the Society of Native Nations framework. Similarly, just one more shout out, I'll mention Joe Banner with the Descendants Project, another frontline community member based in St. John the Baptist Parish in Louisiana. That is the heart of Cancer Alley, right? If you ask Joe why she does this work and what kind of work the Descendants Project is doing, she will talk about how they are a Black Catholic group descended from the enslaved ancestors who founded that community, right? And how their work fighting for environmental justice and fighting for human rights is grounded in that religious tradition. So there are tons of folks, people of faith, community leaders who are already doing this work in that context. And it's a big tent, and there's a lot more room for others to get involved too. So with that, I appreciate the time. I'll pass it back to Grove.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brett. Yes, and I want to just also emphasize, in the interfaith movement, atheists, humanists, moral philosophers, indigenous peoples whose lifestyles are totally spiritual and might not call themselves faith, are all welcome. It is, as you're saying, a very big tent, and I really appreciate you telling us about all of the connections that are happening. I understand that community is a large part of how we are going to maintain the energies that we need to continue on with this incredibly important work. So thank you so much for joining us here. Another colleague, Dalia, I am so grateful that you were able to join us today. You and I have worked together at bringing perspectives through your leadership as part of the Women's Major Group into this whole process. And I'd love to hear what you have to say. I know you've been to all of these INCs, and if you'd tell us from your experience and the advocacy that you've been doing, this would be great.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much. I want to extend my sincere gratitude to the organizer of this event for coordinating this amazing and important discussion. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this critical conversation. So about my personal experience and involvement in the INC, I want to highlight that I have been participating in the INC, representing the Women's Working Group on Ending Plastic Pollution, which is one of the thematic working groups under the Women's Major Group at UNED. So as Women Working Group, this working group was specifically established to track the INC negotiations and to advocate for the inclusion of a gender-responsive approach to plastic pollution. Currently, the group consists in more than 50 organizations with experts specialized in environmental issues, plastic pollution, chemicals, all while incorporating the gender perspective into their work. Our primary objective as working group, as Women's Working Group, is to ensure the gender consideration, the gender dimension are included into the legally binding treaty that we hope to have after the INC process, enabling its implementation to efficiently address the plastic pollution, which disproportionately affect women. So, to ensure that the voices of the women are included in our position papers, the Women's Working Group have different strategies. By example, before each INC, we organize a training or capacity building meeting. Sometimes we have these capacity building sessions with the support of the INC Secretariat. And this initiative is designed to equip individuals who have not attended to previous INCs but are preparing to participate in the upcoming sessions, or to give the general view about the INC to the full members of the Women's Working Group. Additionally, before the INCs, we conduct general consultations by email, but also in sessions like this one, in which one we call the general members of the Women's Working Group. In these general sessions, we analyze the INC materials to try to identify key aspects that we believe that should be included into the negotiations and into the papers of the INC. Also, before the INCs, we try to coordinate, or we coordinate bilateral meetings with some member states to share our vision about what we want to see reflected into the documents, and to try to influence and advocate into the negotiations before the INCs. In this sense, once the INC starts, we already know what member states are aligned or have common visions with us, what of them are supporting the inclusion of the gender perspective, are talking about to have gender disaggregated data, etc. And this pre-coordination makes us easier to have a bigger impact during the negotiations in person. So now I just want to share with you a little bit about the main key aspects that the Women's Working Group of Ending Plastic Pollution think that must be included into the treaty. So, plastic pollution is harmful, and its harmful effects are disproportionately affected women, as I said before. This makes us more vulnerable to the consequences of plastic pollution. Plastic pollution and the endocrine disrupting chemicals in plastics constitute to us a form of gender-based violence. Women and girls are unequally affected by the plastic pollution. Therefore, we work to ensure references to gender equality, women's rights into the treaty, and we strongly advocate for the explicit inclusion of gender equality and women's rights in the preamble of the treaty. Our positions during the previous INCs underscore the urgent need to reduce the production and consumption of primary plastic polymers, as well as eliminate the harmful chemicals found in plastic and recycled materials. The reinforcement of human rights language into the documents, into the treaty, particularly the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, as well as the right to science and the right to know. This is super important because specifically in clean products and skincare products that are created for women, we can find microplastics and nanoplastics without any knowledge that we are consuming nanoplastic and microplastics. Therefore, to us, it's super important to ensure the right to know, the right to information. Also, as I said before, the health impacts of plastic are severe, specifically into the endocrine system, affecting not only women's health, affecting also future generations. So for us, it's imperative to highlight that plastic and their toxic chemical pose a disproportionately risk to women reproductive health. Also, we call for the clear, global, and legally binding measures in the treaty to reduce plastic production, ban hazardous chemicals and microplastics, and to promote design criteria that minimize the unformed substances while fostering reuse and repair. Finally, to us, it's super important to ensure the meaningful participation of the right holders in the development, implementation, review, and update the national plans. And to us, this must be mandatory. Additionally, the treaty must be guided by the precautionary principle when addressing the scientific uncertainties. Finally, we emphasize as group the necessity of a dedicated financial mechanism to support the implementation of the treaty, capacity building, and a just transition. This is something that several countries from the global south are asking for too. And we urge during each one of the INCs for the inclusion of transparency, gender inclusion, gender disaggregated data is a key aspect to us, and of course, inclusivity in shaping a robust treaty that really safeguards future generations from the harmful effects of plastic pollution. So during the different INCs, we see with concern the lack of mention of gender, women's health specifically, because this is not linked only with this generation. This is affecting 100% the future generation. There are research in which one microplastic was found in the first vomit of the child. So we are polluted and we are polluting future generations. So those are like the main concerns of the Women's Working Group on Ending Plastic Pollution. And just to close, I want to highlight that we have been participating into this process with an amazing support of the INC Secretariat that, as I said before, have been supporting us in the capacity building session. So I just take the opportunity to thank openly to the INC Secretariat, and also being there and see the synergy between the different observers and how we try to get the floor, but at the same time collaborate with others to highlight the priorities from the full observers there is amazing. I can confirm that seems like everybody have the same goal, and everybody's looking for a legally binding treaty, an ambitious legally binding treaty, and we keep the high standard, and we hope to have this amazing treaty at the end of the process. Thank you so much, group. Back to you.
Dalia, thank you. You've in very succinct way laid out so many of the different rights and principles that apply in this circumstance from your role as an insider to all of this work. And I'm just grateful because when people are listening to this recording afterwards, you've given them a summary. I also want to just lift up the Congregations of St. Joseph statement. This is something that I'll put the link in the chat, but this is a congregation. It's 10,000 Catholic sisters across the globe who have been sending representatives and participating in the INC process. And their statement, their contribution is about a page long, but in it they say, yes, we've got to get the toxic chemicals out and that we cannot exempt medical waste. So I just want to encourage our audience members, who I hope are thinking of questions because we are at that time in this session, to know that people can weigh in by repeating statements that have already been made, because it's very clear what's needed here. And part of what's needed is a real groundswell to carry on with lifting up that this has got to end. I know that Dr. Philip Landrigan has said that he is full of hope because in effect, we have succeeded at banning toxic chemicals in the past. The ozone problem was actually effectively dealt with. So this is a very concrete, specific situation, and that we can make something happen here. So I'm waiting for questions in the chat. And also I'd like to circle back to Juan with just another follow-up question for you. Some of the standard wisdom in UN processes is that most of the work happens prior to the actual events. And I think what I heard from you is certainly you have been supporting everyone in engaging together prior to, but you've also said that actually during the event is a weighty moment. I know there have been challenges. The venues are not always huge, but would you care to comment again on actually how much work civil society could think about doing prior to the next meeting and how much we could think about doing at that meeting?
Thanks so much, Grove, for the question, and I think it's a really important point to bring up. And some of the attendees in the meeting have been really active in the process already, but I know some others have not engaged. But from my experience working as the focal point for the observers in this process, I can tell you that one of the strongest outcomes from the negotiations have been because of the conversations and the pressure that observers and stakeholders have had with member states. I feel that collaboration and constant conversation before and during the sessions between the stakeholders and the member states have, I think it's has produced some of the outcomes of the negotiations that and the topics that are needed to be brought up in the text, and of course, as you mentioned, the size and the venues, there's always going to be some limitations when it comes to space, and because this is a member state-led process, there are some limitations for the stakeholders. For instance, to take the floor or to even contribute more substantively into the negotiations. But I can tell you that many observer organizations have formed these very powerful coalitions of NGOs or civil society organizations who have come in such a strong force to speak up, to tell member states what matters to them, what are the issues that we need to continue discussing, and this has happened throughout and even before the sessions start. So I think that, for instance, when we talk about the faith-based organizations who have such a large outreach of different communities and cities across the globe, it's really such an opportunity to make sure that those voices are heard in the negotiation, and that you bring up what faith-based organizations are discussing and why is it important for them, the plastic pollution issue. So I would think that fostering those conversations with member states before and during the sessions have been quite useful, I believe.
Juan, I'd like to stay in touch with you in the months ahead so that I'm understanding and can help promote any inputs and places where people who can't necessarily come can actually write in and feel a part of, because we have to work it both ways. And I really thank you for your comments and participation here. Now, I think that we're heading into last comments. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Oh, excuse me, I've got a couple in the Q&A. What are the ideas for weakening the hold of fossil fuels quickly? And when people have to earn a living and there is no choice but to contribute to the environmental problems, how do we open up caretaking avenues to them? These are profound questions. And I think what I'm going to do is just continue down the line of speakers and ask you to address those or making whatever closing comments as you see fit. Azmaira, are you available to
Yes,
speak to us?
can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, JM, for your question. I think I'll speak to the second one. When people have to earn a living, there's no choice but to contribute to environmental problems. How do we open up caretaking avenues to them? Faith communities are already highly engaged in humanitarian efforts, and I think it's the responsibility of those that are engaged in this space or specialize in environment related issues to reach out to the rest of the organization, and highlight how the pollution crisis is affecting livelihoods, is affecting health of individuals and communities, and is affecting the earth. So I think, there's a lot that can be said about engaging, and that's why they're strategic partners, faith organizations, in just leveraging the different places that they work and the areas that they work, and tying those issues together. But also when it comes to youth engagement, and I'm speaking about this in the context of the Faith Worth Youth Council, when we speak about green jobs and we look at what faith-based organizations like the Laudato Si movement, like Ummah for the Earth, and Greenpeace MENA have been doing for young people, it's opening up in understanding within the faith about the environment and how they can practically engage with young people. Grove and I were in a meeting just now with UNEP's executive director, and one of the other participants was Rabbi Janine from Mainu, and she was talking about how she's been supporting young people not only with environmental ethics-based education, but also channeling that interest and that expertise and convening into practical programs that can be done at a very local level, and then sharing that across different countries. So that's a little bit from what I've seen in the work that I've been doing at the Faith for Earth Coalition. Grove, over to you.
We're fast approaching the end of the hour. Brett, we'd love your comments. Thanks.
Yeah, I know we're tight on time here. I just want to lift up what Azmaira was just saying and also echo from a just transition standpoint. I spoke a little bit about waste pickers earlier. There's also, when it comes to folks who are doing this work and the pollution that stems from it, there's a just transition on the petrochemical side as well, right? On the fossil fuel side. And in terms of the role that faith actors can play there, I was speaking again earlier about my colleague Joe Banner in St. John the Baptist Parish, who are pushing for tighter regulations, pushing for protections. They go to church with many of the folks who work in these facilities, right? And so their churches are literally places where you can engage in this sort of organizing. In terms of the first question that was asked, as far as how to sort of keep fossil fuels from dominating these negotiations, I would point to, first, broadly speaking, even outside of the plastics treaty, there's a tremendous divestment movement that's already been really thriving. I know Grove put that in the chat. That's been a big part of the climate movement, which I come out of before joining Break Free from Plastic. I think that faith institutions are a little later to the game in terms of divesting from plastic and petrochemical companies specifically. So that's definitely a way that, the Anglican Church, the Vatican, right? All of these institutions can divest. But I would also say within the negotiations, there is this bigger picture discourse going on right now about multilateralism. And I would say the UN actually has the tools to advance on its mandate here, in this case, by confronting the weaponization of consensus through voting. So that is the most important thing we can do looking ahead to INC 5.2 with that in mind. Back to you, Grove. Thanks.
Thank you. The critique of the overall process is a really important aspect of it. Dalia, back to you. Have you got some closing comments for us?
Yes, thank you. First of all, about the question in the chat, I think that this is a crucial question because many people depend on industries that contribute to environmental harm for the livelihood. So just transition is essential. Just transition is essential, and therefore we insist on this. We must invest in green jobs, provide training, and ensure social protection for those transitioning to sustainable industries, recognizing and integrating, by example, in this case, informal wage workers into formal systems, and also create fair employment opportunities for them. Additionally, in our perspective as Women's Working Group, the treaty should establish a financial mechanism to support capacity building and to ensure this just transition. Corporate responsibility, transparency, and community-led solutions must be prioritized to create viable alternatives that protect both people and the planet. And finally, I just want to thanks to all the amazing experts and people that have been working hard to have, at the end of the INC process, an ambitious treaty. We still have a lot of work to do, but keep the energy, keep the momentum, and keep pushing for the high standards to have this ambitious legally binding treaty to reduce plastic pollution. Thank you so much, group. Back to you.
Dalia, thank you for those perfect concluding comments. We need to keep pushing for the highest ambition treaty. Everybody and every corporation and every country needs to be part of moving towards the solution and to implementing that treaty as it comes on board. I just want to so profoundly thank all of my speakers for being here today. Please feel free to send me links because we'll send them out as we send the recording of this event far and wide. And again, please continue up the work, and we're in this together. And thank you all so very, very much.